Dă-ne de acolo. Ne da ceva de acolo.
Cred că dai later.
Tu vrei să spui,
Vezi
nu?
că acum cred că s-au... Ah. Da.
Nu, ăla nu.
Da,
merge.
ok.
Astea le lăsăm pe aici, că sunt ale...
Da.
Unde?
Așa. Să împărgem muzica de film. Copiază tot folderul, că am pus și filmulețe și așa.
Tot ce e aici pe...
Da.
Nu, tot asta sau tot?
Nu, tot asta, muzică de film.
Ok. Să-l pun aici?
Da. Și după ce se copiază și scoatem, că...
Da. Și faci și probă repede.
Păi eu sunt prima, deci trebuie. Da.
Zic că trebuie să lăsăm pe desktop. Facem și repede o probă de sunet.
E cineva pe Zoom?
Da, doamna Dediu.
Că a zis că e interesant.
Era în mașină la Sinaia. La
Kosti. Good morning to everybody. I hope you had a good rest yesterday. Dear friends, dear colleagues, I'm inviting you all here around the table. And good morning also with the people online. Thank you for being with us, Valentina and the others. Thank you. So, Desiela? Veniți cu toți aici. Beni, veniți pe lângă masă că sunt places, sunt locuri.
Ca să stai în mijloc, nu cine vorbește.
Stai aici, ok, sorry.
Poți să stai acolo.
Să stea aici, pentru că are nevoie de computer. It is a great pleasure and honor for us to have another session. Actually, it's the last session of our conference today. We are privileged to introduce you another excellent group of young researchers. All of them are PhD students, which are going to present their PhD in a month. Vlad probably in the next 2 years, something like this. What I'm going to say is that I'm personally, and I'm sure it is not only my opinion, we are extremely privileged to have them here in the last years, because we have been starting doing all kinds of things in terms of research, and I'd like to say that they were always part of our team. In the last years, we've done a lot of conferences, a lot of projects. I would like just to name 5 international projects. The first one, I think, was in 2018, something like this, when our students went the first year of PhD, the control of music effects and consequences of the institution of censorship on music culture and education in Europe. That was in the spring of 2018. In the autumn, we organized here the International Musicological Congress, the branch of the Balkans, alongside with International Musicological Society, musical and cultural osmosis in the Balkans. And also our colleagues were here, young colleagues were here together. Next year we had a very interesting conference and project running with files from different archives in Bucharest and Romania, from the Union of Composers and Musicologists, from National Archives. National Discourses on Music in Central and Eastern Europe was the title of this conference, and they produced excellent paper. The following year was about salon music. We discovered a lot of musical manuscripts dating back to the beginning of the 19th century, which were related to Western music and, wave of Westernization coming in the Romanian principalities in Moldavia and Wallachia. Of course, in that time, Transylvania was part of the empire, and the title of the conference was Elites and Their Music and Music Making in the 19th Century, Southeastern European Salons. We produced some collections. You can see them there, and to have them if you want it. And the last the conference we organized last year was connecting with musics of powers, music and musicians in totalitarian regimes in the 20th century Europe, also based on the archives and new findings in different institutions. Of course, we couldn't access until 1990s, something like this. So. What I want to say is that during these 4 or 5 years, all of us, not only our young scholars and friends here, but also ourselves, have had different kinds of experiences. It was a kind of challenge for all of us somehow to run different kind of approaches, different kind of researches, so on and so forth. I'm stop here. Costin, please invite and present our speakers in this morning. Thank you.
We share the part of the conveners today, me and Nicolae, and I took the easy part to present our speakers. It's easy because some features are common for all of them. As you see, they're young, they're bright, they're all students of Valentina Sandu Dediu. And of course, everyone has some peculiarities.
We are jealous, you know.
Ana Diaconu is a multifaceted musicologist. She's one of the most productive musicologists of the younger generation. In the last last issues of Musicology Today, you'll see a lot of her papers. She also had, or maybe even has, a career as a journalist, specialized in interviews, and has a particular connection with France. She studied for a semester in the Conservatoire de Paris, and is interested in the life and activity of a Romanian composer who emigrated in France, Costin Mieranu, and not so many others, Celarianu. So today she will speak to us about, and something I had also to mention, she is in charge with the publication of the festival George Enescu, of which I'm sure you are familiar with. Today she will talk about the image and sound an encounter in the avant-garde, or avant-garde.
Avant-garde today. Thank you so much for your flattering presentation, and thank you, Professor Gheorghiță, not only for this presentation today, but I think I speak for all my young colleagues here when I say that we are really grateful for being part of all the projects that you mentioned, for having the chance to sit at the table with the grown-ups in musicology.
You're grown up.
Since we were not so grown up, and it's been an honor. We learned a lot, and now I speak for myself when I say that my PhD thesis that is almost done now was somehow very much shaped around this project. It began in a way, and then it was shaped along these 4 years to match the activities, the research activities that we had, and I think it was an advantage. All our access to archives and to primary sources was really helpful, and I'm not the only one who was influenced in that manner. A context, you already received context about my PhD, because this small paper is a part of my PhD, which regards the activity of Romanian composers who emigrated to France in the second half of the 20th century. That is, Mieranu is the principal figure of my PhD, and then Horațiu Rădulescu, Mihai Mitra Celarianu. With this occasion, I accepted the challenge to also approach the film music, which wasn't that rich in his creation, but I was interested in the way they treated this subject as really avant-garde composers, because that was the reason, one of the reasons that they emigrated, because they were maybe too modern for their times. So the preoccupation with film music was a facet that I discovered in Costin Mieranu's musical activity in the period before emigration, a little later. The only mention of such a preoccupation that I found in the beginning when researching the Union of Composers archive was in the list attached to Costin Mieranu's application for the admission to the Union as a trainee member, dated November 24, 1966. Costin Mieranu has not, however, shied away from the artistic credo of the avant-garde, even in the field of film, where he has collaborated on visual equivalents of his music and aesthetics. Before detailing the results of Mieranu's collaboration with the painter Sabin Bălașa, it is at least important to point out that at the age of 23, Costin Mieranu was among the not very numerous composers who had the opportunity to work for the newly established animation film studio Anima Film. From the National Film Archive, where I researched together with my colleagues in the project, I was able to recover a file with instrumental parts of the animated film The Drop, Picătura, which provoked my interest in deepening this chapter of Costin Mieranu's creation, which seems to me to reveal interesting information of aesthetic on one side and even socio-political context. In his more than 100 texts published in the Romanian press during his studies period and early career, Costin Mieranu debated and commented on all aspects of musical life and creation, and film music was no exception. Before becoming active as a creator of the genre himself, Mieranu published several articles in the Cinema Journal in 1965, which, although dealing with certain specific aspects, in fact covered broader issues about the functions and procedures used in film music in general, revealing the author's personal conceptions of them. An opportunity for debate was offered to the author Costin Mieranu by the film Four Steps to Infinity, La Patru Pași de Infinit, which he commented on starting from the reflection of Roman Vlad, another Romanian immigrant musician who was established at that time in Italy, which sounded like this: film music, an exercise for the left hand. Although he also had some positive remarks about the score, as the premise reveals, Mieranu was quite vehement in his criticism of several stylistic choices made by composer of that film music, George Grigoriou, who I have to mention was mainly a popular music composer. Moreover, polemical expression characterized Mieranu's discourse in almost all areas of musical life, which, at least in the field of film music, probably contributed to the crystallization of his own style, which he practiced from the following year onwards. Four Steps from Infinity is a 1964 film that fits in with the theme promoted by director Francisc Munteanu, the anti-fascist resistance and the communist movement in Romania during the Second World War, illustrated correctly in terms of the propaganda of the time. Labeled as part of the action film genre, the film is based on a rather static atmosphere, presenting the forbidden romance between Mihai, a defecting communist officer, and Anna, the daughter of the surgeon who has agreed to treat and shelter him in his home. Despite the low density of events and settings, most of the scenes taking place in the doctor's family home and the moments being quite stretched, the tension build-up is skillfully constructed on two levels, one of the war and the other of a clandestine love affair between a doctor's underage daughter and a deserter officer older than her. The wide resonance and, I quote, maximum temperature at which the present of the film is experienced are the arguments that justify for Mieranu, I quote, the acute need for the constitutive presence of a music with material weight in the drama of the conflict. Distinguishing between sound background and dramatic component, as the title of the article announces, the author classifies George Grigoriou's soundtrack as a sound commentary that only accompanies the film, not being an integral part of it. This commentary is nevertheless adequate and, I quote, possesses a quality or a defect. It does not disturb the viewer's perception. A first pointed criticism concerns the economy of thematic material, whereas quantitatively the sound background is quite present in the film, as Mieranu remarks. He lists only 3 thematic-like constructions in the entire 1.5 hour runtime of the film, which he does not consider really appropriate to the charge of the moments they represent. Mieranu's first criticism is of the few seconds of background sound at the beginning, which he describes as false generic, that is abruptly interrupted by the sound of a train entering the station. He complains of the stereotypical filmic overture that, if avoided, would perhaps have given the film a beneficial flow. Predictability is also the aspect that Mieranu dislikes about the film's main theme, which represents the relationship between Anna and Mihai and obsessively accompanies their interactions. And I quote, finally, the Anna-Mihai leitmotif, surprising and beautiful, strange sounding at first, enveloped in the immaterial sounds of electronic organ, mellows unpermittedly through abuse and the lack of even the slightest melodic variation. Although orchestrally the composer sketches an attempt at coloristic renewal of the invariable melodic substance, the appearance of the leitmotif becomes so formalized, so conventional, that at one point you assume it in anticipation whenever the two heroes are left alone on screen. But it also appears when, tired, you give up the sound anticipation. Emotional shock in the present situation, the sequence in which Anna plays the piano alone in the absence of her teacher, repetition is sought at all costs, even aiming at the paradoxical. We would have expected Anna to play any piece of widely read piano literature. We would have preferred Bach, Beethoven, or even Chopin, but not at all the omnipresent leitmotif transposed into another key and another arrangement. And now, I hope I will be able to show you. No. The first apparition.
Mi-a părut chiar bine că am renunțat. Spunea că trebuie să facă niște cumpărături. Dumneavoastră poate sunteți obosit și eu vă deranjez.
Mă deranjez numai atunci când îmi spui dumneavoastră. Câți ani ai?
18. Știți, am fost odată cu mama la teatru și ne-am întâlnit cu profesorul meu de fizică. Mi-a spus să rămână. Am crezut că m-a confundat, dar nu era așa. Mi-a spus, dumneata, domnișoară, nu te-ai împăcat niciodată cu butelia de Leida. Și e adevărat, nu pot să sufăr fizică. Și atunci cum să vă spun?
Îmi spui simplu. Dumneata. Și dacă vrei, vom fi foarte buni prieteni. Dar cu o condiție. Să nu afle nimeni că stau la voi.
De ce?
Pentru că eu n-am drept la spitalizare. Am fugit de pe front.
Va să zică dezertor. Asta înseamnă că ești laș.
Da, puțin laș.
Nu cred.
De ce nu crezi?
Fiindcă azi noapte, în timpul operației, n-ai scos niciun geamăt.
Tot de frică. Mi-era frică să...
11. Vrei o țigară?
And lastly, the moment Miranu is
Fear.
going to with the
Doarme.
lessons. Considering the score of the film Four Steps to Infinity, I quote, partially successful but uneven and sometimes contradictory, Costin Mieranu formulates from it a requirement that he considers necessary in the conception of film music. I quote, it must not remain a mere objective catalyst, it is required to bring the incandescence of the substance that conditions, subjectively and effervescently, the very reaction of the audience. A few stylistic preferences can already be discerned that will define Mieranu's own attempts in this genre. A greater thematic variety, the unpredictability of certain sound image associations, the imaginative variation of the main themes, and at the level of all sound parameters, not just timbre. This was the first hypothesis of Mieranu that I wanted to show, that was music critic, because he wrote a lot and he commented on everything. And then it came the composer hypothesis. The circumstances in... I will go back to my The circumstances in which Mieranu came to write the music for one of the most important series of animated short films in Romania in 1966-68 are uncertain, but can be explained without any doubt, at least by the common stylistic affinities of the two collaborating artists towards the avant-garde. Sabin Balazs belonged to an earlier generation than the composer, becoming famous long before his 40th birthday as a surrealist painter characterized by so-called cosmic romanticism springing from the color of infinite blue. There are controversial details about his biography. He was considered the court painter of the Ceausescu family in the 1970s and 80s because he agreed to paint a series of stylized portraits of the dictator and his wife, thus becoming one of the most highly paid and privileged visual artists of the communist period. Without knowing the details of the visual arts world under communism, if I draw a parallel with the information revealed in the Securitate archive about Costin Mieranu, I can draw some similarities between the destinies of the two. They were among the most vocal promoters of the artistic avant-garde, both in their written statements and in their actual creative practice, and in order to afford this creative freedom, they resorted to certain socio-political compromises, much or less significant. In 1966, Sabin Balazs was given the opportunity to extend his preoccupations in painting to film, using the paint-on-glass under-camera technique. Inspired to a certain extent by the modernity of Jan Lenika's Polish School of Animation, the themes of Sabin Balazs's adult animations were the same ones he promoted in his paintings: Genesis, cosmogony, the couple, ephemeral human existence, apocalypse, the blue of nature concentrated in waters and horizons. Surrealism here is given both visually and sonically by a fluid abstract conception based on the symbolism of spiritual themes that are difficult to express in any language. And this transcendental rendering of visual art fitted in perfectly with Costin Mieranu's stylistic inclinations in composition, who was a strong advocate of the avant-garde and who, from 1967 onwards, began to be more and more inclined towards conceptual philosophical creations presented under the cloak of aleatoricism. This is how Sabin Balazs described his conception of filmmaking in 1970. He said stuff like, "I don't want to entertain the audience, enough of the others do, but I want to culturalize them. I think about and make films for the audience, for the general public, which does not seem to me to be open only to the easy, as some comrades at the film directorate think. Beyond the statement of technical and thematic affinities oriented towards an ideal of metamorphosis in painting and against caricature and animated entertainment productions, we find that Sabin Balazs had the desire to open new horizons for the public, to culturalize the public through a genre that in its American origins, that's what he says, was not exactly intended for this purpose. And the idea of not underestimating the audience's receptive capacities was also a leitmotif in Mieranu's speech before his emigration. He said things like that the general public has been and continues to be thirsty for the new. The great public is hostile and alien to Philistinism. Those who have always had reservations at the outset about new phenomena have not been the listeners, but the specialists left behind." The belief in a higher mission of assuming the role of messengers of the avant-garde in the arts was therefore an important point of connection between the painter Sabin Balazs and the composer Costin Mieranu. And the importance that Balazs conferred to the symbiosis of the arts in terms of novelty and opening horizons can also be seen in his public discourse, in which he spoke of his films as complete and complex artistic creations and of the need for public access to such creations, even though he masked his idea with propagandistic cliché many times. He underlined the importance of combining the virtues of painting with those of music and cinema, for example. The short film Picătura, The Drop, released in 1966 by Anima Film, was the only one I found in the National Film Archives collection of scores under Costin Mieranu's name. Although for a long time I considered it an isolated experiment in the composer's film music genre, I was pleased to have the opportunity to analyze the context of this interesting collaboration. The biggest surprise came when watching the film, when I discovered that although the music plays a crucial role in expressing the artistic message, sharing the stage with the symbolist painting and reinforcing its meanings, the composer's name was nowhere to be found in the introduction. Sabin Balazs was mentioned in 2 frames, direction and scenography and painted animation, and Marin Sorescu was also mentioned as the author of the scenario. Moving further down the chronological thread, I discovered that Balazs created an entire movement in the avant-garde of animated films, making 9 short films between 1966 and 1979, and the author of the music is not mentioned in any of the 9. The detective action went further through my attempts to compare in style and sound these short soundtracks, where I found many common elements, especially between the first 4 films. The films created between 66 and 68. From the press articles I have identified, but also from the testimony of the painter's son, the artist Tudor Balazs, that I contacted, I could confirm that Mireanu had written the music for the first 4 films of this new animation direction proposed by Sabin Balazs. The 5th film, Fascinations, was released in 1969 when Mireanu had already settled in Paris, and online sources identify Radu Zamfirescu as the composers of the music, while the next Back to the Future was made in 1971 in Rome with Elvin Carl. It remains a mystery, however, how Mireanu was persuaded to accept such a partnership in terms of visibility, him not being mentioned in any of the credits, and what was the reason that led Balazs to resort to this solution despite the apparent very generous stylistic freedom he granted for the scores of his animations. There is also a slight possibility that his name was removed from the film after his emigration, but it seems unlikely given that from the 2nd film onwards, no other name but Balazs appears in the credits. There is an obvious stylistic coherence between the first 4 films made by Sabin Balazs. They inaugurated a new trend of pictorial animation for adults. The themes were similar, though nuanced, and the music certainly played an important role. Each film is around 5-6 minutes long, and the films were shown together during 1968, so they could be perceived and interpreted as a series. The success of The Drop, and implicitly of the new direction initiated by Balazs in animation, was confirmed during the first International Animation Film Festival in Romania, held in Mamaia in 1966, where the film won the Silver Pelican Award for the Best Animated Picture. Enthusiasm for the newly established international event, which lasted for only 3 editions until 1970, gave Sabin Balazs' film a certain notoriety, while at the same time stirring up divergent opinions in the press at the time. The themes promoted by Balazs, genesis, transformations, destiny, the passage of time, did not reveal themselves with the same clarity for all viewers. Some would say Sabin Balazs' essay in The Drop was a demonstration of painting animation. The image handicapped the direction, which dissolved the film being brought to the edge of literary comprehension. And literary critic Edgar Papu describes Balazs' early films by imagining parallels with musical language, but without actually mentioning the music. It is precisely this, the fluid metamorphoses that are described in the press of shapes, of colors that Balazs imagines in his films that were the central objectives of Mireanu's score, which opens the series of instrumental parts with the catalog of the hypostasis of the drop leitmotif throughout the film. On the one hand, we find it respects the principles set out in his earlier criticism of film music. The themes should not harass the viewer's ears through identical repetitions, continually varying the appearances of the theme harmonically, rhythmically, and timbrally. On the other hand, it is interesting to see the choice to introduce the motif for the first time in the second half of the animation, alongside the appearance of a female figure in the foreground. And the second half of the soundtrack is reserved exclusively for the metamorphosis of this motif. The bizarre effects and the eerie atmosphere are especially shaped by the chosen timbrality and obsessive but perpetually faltering repetition of a poignant and concise motif of only 3 bars. No composer name. And so on. Sabine Balasha's second film, The City, was prepared in 1967 for the Annecy International Animation Festival, and although it rated themes from the first film, The Passage of Time, Genesis, the spiritual osmosis that unites kingdoms and species, peoples and ages. This was a quote. It was unanimously appreciated by critics as having a better technical and visual achievement than The Drop, and the contribution of the music appears this time underlined in the press. I quote, "As for Sabine Balasha's The City, this time on his own script, it is much more complete than The Drop, much better work, but less spectacular. What the gestures of the characters merged in the desire for the unreal want to say suggests the dream. The dream remains absent outside the film, although it is expected. Only Costin Miranu's music reminds us of it." Costin Miranu resorts this time to statuesque sounds, homogeneously chained blocks of sound that enhance the atmosphere while not overshadowing the visual dimension of the film. The painter's choice to metaphorically represent the city through an all-encompassing female face is interesting, to which Miranu responds musically in the second half of the short film with an incantation on soprano voice, and as the buildings, images, and feelings of the city accumulate, the incantations intensify in a polyphonic manner. But that won't work because we have a technical problem. The third film, The Phoenix Bird, is made by the alternation of the technique of cardboard cutouts with painting under the camera, and at first glance, the poorest in terms of ideatic, visual, and even musical content. In an article praising the innovation of Sabine Balasha's achievements in the field of animated films, Barutsu Arghezi emphasized the authenticity and Romanian spirituality of the film The Phoenix Bird, a fact that now, half a century later, becomes almost hilarious when we talk about an experiment of total and assumed avant-garde, both conceptually, graphically, and musically. And the quote is, "The Phoenix Bird has a Romanian authenticity and an expression of high poetry, close in essence to the Miorița ballad, and the great energies of our people. In the global confrontation, this film will win like the other great ideas of contemporary Romanian spirituality." The year 1968 marked the moment of Miranu's last collaboration with Sabine Balasha for the film The Wave. Having been rewarded like The Drop with the Silver Pelican Prize at the second edition of the Mamaia Festival, the film reiterates in a somewhat more explicit manner the themes and techniques of The Drop. Metamorphosis of the continuity of life painted under the camera and musically mirrored by the same technique of the pregnant and varied leitmotif, this time in a somewhat more lyrical and symphonically amplified treatment. The 4 animated films by Sabin Balazs with music by Mieranu have been screened several times in Romania, probably thanks to the privileged status of the painter in the Romanian intellectual environment, but also abroad, especially in the period from the late 1960s to the beginning of the eighth decade. Following this international exposure and the confirmation by awards of the success of his new avant-garde direction in Romanian animation, Sabin Balazs summed up his artistic approach in an interview with Octavian Ursulescu in Scânteia Tineretului. From my first film that dropped my fourth, The Wave, I have made a calm and steady progress in terms of creating a personal conception of the dramaturgy of my films. Based on these beliefs, I will continue my work, seeking to elucidate step by step a new dramaturgy, which will unite in a superior way painting with movement and idea. Balazs indeed continued his work in the field of animation, completing his collection of short films with 5 new titles in the period 69-79, while for Mieranu I have not identified any other works in the area of film music after he settled in Paris, benefiting from numerous other compositional opportunities through the Salabert Publishing House, but also in the academic field of semiotics. The freedom that Balazs and Mieranu assumed in a totalitarian regime by creating and developing a syncretic artistic project synchronized with the world avant-garde, in which music and image had comparable weights in the complexity, atmosphere, and the philosophical concept of the resulting films, remains, however, a testimony to the fact that art has always found ways to slip through, to manifest itself in all forms, and to its full potential regardless of the era. It is the circumstances, the difficulty of the obstacles, and the degree of success of each attempt that delineate the nuances of each such collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for your paper. It raised a lot of questions from different spheres, and now probably we want some answers. Please feel to put questions. Philip, please.
Sorry, it's only the third day and I still can't use the mic. Thank you, Anna, so much for a beautifully delivered presentation and an amazing story. I wondered about the difference between animation and then the kind of narrative storytelling that you began with the theme, the film you talked about. I didn't write the title down, with the leitmotif. Is there a difference in the word, image, and then image music relationship in the theory of animated film that you're talking about in the last part, from the narrative films that you began with? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a completely different universe, actually. I chose that example in order to show some ideas that Mieranu vehiculated in the press of the time, and that he was pretty radical concerning the composition, and he was actually against the conservative composers, not only in the film domain, so in general. So I think there are different principles, but regarding this, the use of the themes, the leitmotifs, I think for Mieranu they were really important, and I think that if he was to write music for a narrative film like that, he would have conceived a way to work on his themes and to vary them and make them special for each apparition. Yeah, that was the connection. Otherwise, I think they are different.
Karina, please.
Thank you for your presentation. Really interesting. would you say, or what's your opinion on if there was in the 70s or even in the 60s a kind of a genre or movement of experimental animation paired with music, or was this, you know, more like a unique collaboration? Because I know that in Finland there were a couple of, not a big a group of people with animators mostly collaborating with electronic music
Okay.
makers, but a very small group of people, but still they got their work shown, and they're still around. I mean, they are sometimes shown on festivals. But how would you describe it? Was this something that was, you know, tried by several movie makers, animation makers
In Romania or?
in Romania?
Okay, it was tried. It was an avant-garde movement, but most of the, I tried to, this is not my field of research, but for this special occasion, I tried to understand a little bit the context and the country, the movement that they copied, that they inspired from, is the movement from Poland. And there it began a few years earlier, this surrealist abstract animation for adults with Lenica and others who collaborated with Penderecki and other great composers. But the difference is that they credited the composers, the Polish, the Polish film makers. And here there were others, but the main, from what I read and from what I had the chance to see, the main technique that was used was caricature, and Balasha had different, more painting-like technique. That was the difference. And they used, they collaborated with composers, and they gave a big place to music in these adult abstract animations. Yeah. Thank you.
Composers of
In this movement,
Yeah,
composers.
I read at one point that Capoianu wrote something for Gopo film.
yeah, the Sila is going to.
Yeah. And there were mentions about the music in the press, about the animations that were that received prizes in this festival. Actually, I think the years for this movement were 66, 70, 70, because there were also those animation film festivals in Mamaia, 3 editions, and they were trying to synchronize with the avant-garde at the European level in order to have projects to show. And I think that was the movement, because after that they closed the cultural door to the exterior. Okay. May I ask you a question? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was interesting. And I have a question about the later writings of Mirianu, because I remember him being active in this international project of music signification. And for me, it would be interesting if he was later continuing writing about the image and sound, about this interaction, or he just changed his focus in his own writings and analysis of music.
Well, he also had some himself some media works, and that way he wrote about this. About film, I didn't find any writings, later writings from after he emigrated. In any case, my period of research is until the immigration, and the first writings after the immigration, which were published in the Musique en Jeu in France. So I'm not aware of everything that he wrote after. I didn't find film music related text, but he was passionate about this correlation, sound image, even if in his graphic scores and commentaries on graphic scores, and I don't know, there are some similarities between an abstract animation like this and an abstract score, graphic score, for example.
Thank you very much. Do you have any idea, any information on about the audiences of these films, about the reception of these films? Only on in festivals they were presented.
Only festivals were represented these films?
No. They were also given several times in Bucharest cinemas. The critics were mainly positive in the press. Sabin Balasha was a really, really appreciated figure, so that helped him offer the public whatever he wanted, because he was a notorious painter, maybe one of the most notorious in those years. So he had that. But otherwise, I found a lot of articles in which he complains that they are not distributed enough, that they are not offered to the public enough, and usually they were projected in series, like all the first 4 or maybe 5, 6 when he created the others, because they were short. And there were also nights, events with animations not only by him. So there were, from what I got the chance to see there, I found at least 10 occasions of projections in Bucharest and others abroad at festivals, and also in those years.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Bravo. Our next speaker in this morning session is Desiela. Desiela, you know her very well because she's chatting with you and helps a lot in this conference and in the past conferences. I'd like to say that Desiela studied musicology at our university. Her supervisor is Professor Valentina Sandu Dediu. She did a master bachelor here in our university, connected with different topics, from interpretations of European neoclassicism to film and jazz music. Through the years, she won prizes in musicology, piano, and music theory competitions. She published articles in different newspapers in Romania and abroad, and she now is doing a PhD with Valentina Sandu Dediu. So, Desiela, actually, she helps me a lot doing everything in my department, because she's part of our research department as an assistant, and she is my assistant in this way. And she's going to present us film and jazz music in the works of Dumitru Capoianu, one of the composers that Professor Antigona mentioned, that wrote something avant-gardist or related with Gopos animated films, right? Yeah.
Good morning again. My paper is not part of my doctoral thesis, but is somehow related to. Is actually inspired by our, I say newly founded, but from a couple of years ago, Romanian Musical Archive, which has big funds from the family of composers with scores and books and mainly unpublished scores that now we are trying to publish them somehow on the internet, on the platform. And in this regard, our professors Antigona Radulescu and Florinela Popa were in charge with and are in charge with projects of this about this Romanian musical archive. The establishment of the communist rule means for post-war Romania a violent break with the traditions of the previous period, directly impacting our country's political, social, economic, and cultural life. The new system, imposed by Moscow in 1944-1945, would use art and literature as government policy instruments and as tools of propaganda, following the socialist realism doctrine to the letter. Music is not exempted from the model dictated by the Soviet Union. The main platform for local composers and theoreticians, the Romanian Composers Society, founded and led by George Enescu, now becomes the Composers Union of the People's Republic of Romania. On the occasion of the National Conference, organized in October 1949 by Matei Socor, the union's future president, the changes to be implemented within the institutions are set, meant to defend the musicians' interests in the new socialist state. The former organization and management are accused, among others, of protecting interwar music, now stigmatized as cosmopolite and decadent, of being indifferent towards the authentic national music, of disregarding folk song, and of insisting on copyrights, which stimulated, I quote, a plethora of authors of a music vulgar to the obscene, end of quote. In this context, membership of the Romanian Composers Society is revoked, and all composers are subjected to a painstaking process of examination, following which they are denied access or welcome to the new Composers Union. On the first list of verified composers was in 1949 young Dumitru Capoianu, accepted as intern member with the possibility to apply for full membership after approximately 4 years. Selection criteria for both full and intern members were confused, but from the extant documents, two important aspects contributing to the decision of the evaluation committee are apparent: the composer's social origins and their residence. Capoianu had just turned 20 when those changes in the Composers Union were taking place. Born on October 19, 1929 in Bucharest, he was taught violin by Professor Gheorghe Deriețeanu, who advised him to enroll at the Royal Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. During his final years at the Academy, Capoianu took up the position of violinist in the National Theatre and General Work Confederation orchestras, and also conducted sundry union choirs, all of which likely facilitated his entry in the newly founded Composers Union. Accepted as intern member at the end of 1949 and as full member in 1953, Capoianu became in 1963 principal member of the Department of Orchestral and Chamber Music of the Composers Union. In the 1950s and at the beginning of the 60s, Capoianu wrote songs, choruses, and chamber works rather in the national spirit required by the regime, and which often took the form of incorporating folk music motifs and using a modal language, not too chromatic. But one of his most important and beautiful works, Variațiunile cinematografice, Cinematographic Variations, published in 1967, dates from a time when composers were allowed a certain amount of creative freedom subsequent to the communist rules warming up to the West at the end of the 60s, also with regard to its music. For instance, at the 1949 National Conference, jazz had been listed as belonging to the decadent music and practices next to the Catholic faith, circus music, spiritism, and atonality. But after the political instability in the wake of the death of Gheorghe Gheorghiu Dej in 1965, and in line with the wish of the Romanian government, led by Nicolae Ceausescu, to preserve independence from the USSR, several composers will be able to approach jazz, among whom Dumitru Capoianu, Pascal Bentoiu, and Dumitru Bughici. Capoianu and Bugic would, for that matter, write in 1966-67 their first jazz pieces, Cinematographic Variations and Symphony No. 3, Jazz Echoes, respectively. Combining jazz with incidental and film music, Capoianu composes the superb cinematographic variations and submits them to the approval of the Union's Department of Orchestral and Chamber Music on April 6, 1966. It's quite likely that Capoianu had easy access to recordings or scores from overseas before that year, namely during the time he was working as composer, sound editor, and sound operator for the Alexandru Sahia Cinematographic Studios, because the jazz elements and techniques in the variations tell of a thorough knowledge of a genre for a while banned in post-war Romania. Moreover, in 1967, Capoianu and Teodor Grigoriu received, as members of the Composers Union, a grant offer by the US Department of State. The trip to America resulted in an interesting article written by Capoianu for the Union's magazine, Musica, issue 9 of the same year. A very captivating fragment is dedicated to jazz music, and the composer humorously recounts how he attended dedicated concerts and talked to specialists during his visit to New Orleans. Both the professional dialogue with Richard Allen, summarized for the magazine, and all jazz-related notions prove that the composer was intimately acquainted with the genre before his trip to the US and even before he wrote the cinematographic variations in 1966. Says Capoianu in an interview from 1993, I quote, "The variations are by no means connected to any of the many films I had written the music for until then, but they are cinematographic precisely in that this art is a consumer of all music genres and the composer simply has to master them all." End of quote. This false symphony is organized in 4 separate contrasting sections, each representing a certain music genre: orchestral, chamber, illustrative, and jazz, both using both the chromatic whole and other somewhat neoclassical elements: polymodality, polychordism, fugue and extended ABB form, accumulation and acceleration techniques. Another bridge between jazz and film music is identifiable as the exploitation of film noir topoi in the 30s and the 40s, such as suspense, chase, revelation, waiting. And now we can hear the beginning, the small fragment of the cinematographic variations. The recording is old from the 60s, but we can still hear the sound of the music. his work at the Composers Union, Capoianu also goes into incidental and film music. Hired as sound operator at the Rom Film and Sahia Studios in the 50s, he would shortly begin writing soundtracks for Ion Popescu Gopo's films, earning the Palme d'Or at the 1957 Cannes Film Festival for Omulețului Gopo, Gopo's Little Man, from the animated cartoon Scurtă Istorie, A Short History. Capoianu continued working with Gopo until 1986, and the director described warmly their collaboration spanning over more than 30 years. I quote, "Capoianu is undoubtedly the best composer of film music. He is creative, he can write new music and classical music. He is knowledgeable in the cinematographic technique, the master of soundtrack which he intelligently fuses with image, aiming first and foremost to respect the contents and not the form." End of quote. The short film condenses the story of humanity's evolution from the beginning of the solar system to the flight into the cosmos in the shortest space of time. In Popescu Gopo's 1963 book, Movies, 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 he sums up the history of the creation of this film and several of his other films, revealing that the first design for his future short history film was a staircase with steps, first made of rocks, then wood, then stone, clay bricks, concrete and iron, and finally plastic steel, powered by atomic energy, the staircase itself a symbolic representation of the history of mankind, which you will see in a minute. On the first step, Gopo recounts, climbed a man dressed in animal skins. On the second, he was dressed in a costume from Egyptian times. On the third, he wore a Greek costume. On the fourth, an iron costume from the Middle Ages, then trimmed with purple silk and lace. He leapt to the next step, placing a tall or flattened hat on his head, until the little man, dressed in modern clothes, jumped onto the automatic ladder from the top, of which he looked back on the history of the costume. And let's watch a short history. Aici. In 1962 Musica article, discuții despre problemele muzicii de teatru și film, on incidental and film music, Capoianu, for that matter, discusses the various methods to be used for film music to serve the story, such as the synchronous-asynchronous technique in relation to the character's psychological reaction and the musical explanation given a second earlier or later. Capoianu would remain a member of the Department of Orchestral and Chamber Music at the Composers Union, making ever rarer appearances towards the end of his life and until his death in 2012. He continued composing many film music and jazz-inspired scores, such as Dodeca Jazz, trio for soprano, saxophone, violin, and jazz percussion, 4 guitar pieces, Trixie, Toccata, Dodecanese, and Bossa Fox for 2 guitar, or Fațete, jazz orchestral suite. The beginning of Capoianu's career coincided with a very difficult time in Romanian politics, as the regime pressured the composers into writing in a spirit as national and folklore-inspired as possible. The later wish to compose film and jazz music points to Capoianu distancing himself from this model, looking west and attempting to create a more universal works, a quite significant attitude in the Romanian music from after the 50s. Even if Capoianu continued to write film, jazz, serial, or dodecaphonic music, genres which Ceausescu communist rule didn't necessarily approve of, he succeeded in balancing local and universal and remaining highly respected and active in Romanian musical life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Desiela, questions, commentaries? Kindly invited. Harry?
Thank you very much, Desiela. That was wonderful and really very, very, very interesting from all sorts of point of view. There were two things that I would be really interested in your opinion about. One is that I couldn't hear any evidence of jazz whatsoever in the musical excerpts you played. And the second was the 1957 Little Man score sounds to me like a kind of archetype of animation music. Now, I only say that because I'm not sure whether he has initiated this or he's borrowing from perhaps French film or other kinds of European animation. But just looking at that and listening to it on the screen, it sounded as if he was paying into a universal with regard to the kind of music you would write for that kind of film. So those are the two issues.
So at the first question, the fourth part is mostly the most jazz influenced part. The first 3 parts more in the cinematographic part. And related to the second question, in the 60s, there was a big debate at the Composers Union in regards to national and universal, because of the regime, the tone shifted to what is national in Romanian music and what is international, and the balance between these two aspects. And this debate was, you can see it everywhere, in the minutes of the Union of Composers, in the archives, in the press. And I think, yes, he was very inspired by European, I think, mostly European animated music, yes.
I'm very glad to hear that, because that's what it sounded like. I mean, it's like watching a French animated movie from the 1950s. I mean, very different to the music we heard earlier. You know,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sorry. Just a quick follow-on to that. As well as your dialogue of Romanian composers of the West, it's also worth remembering that I grew up with a vast amount of what I now know to be East European animation, which was broadcast on the BBC, and primarily Czech, but also Polish, and the Italian side of my family grew up with all of this material because partly of the communist parties in Western Europe creating a bridge point, often around avant-garde and experiment, but also because animation and music of that quality, and it was wonderful. We had lots of papers where people have laughed, but actually had to have a paper where everyone just smiled about this was very, and partly nostalgia and partly just because it's very beautiful. But just to say that there was a huge resistance in large amounts of Western post-war Europe to commercialized and also didactic filmmaking, and that this kind of work was seen as free and inspiring and captivating and charming and of a very high quality. And so I don't think there was much Romanian animation in British film. We had mostly Czech and Polish, but I certainly know in Italy this was circulating very, very extensively. So one can turn the whole debate round and not just make it about the reception of Western techniques in Romania, but really the other way around. And certainly a lot of film music and radio music composers working for the BBC were looking to the other side of the Iron Curtain for inspiration as to what they saw as very advanced technical and conceptual work that was emerging. So I think we just should sometimes turn round the presumptions of who is imitating who in this story.
I didn't know about the BBC.
Yeah, that was. I only later discovered that this was all emerging from East and Central Europe, because no one told us we were watching.
I think that's
Oh. It would be interesting to investigate.
Well, also because you get a lot of composers in the UK thinking, well, we don't have a structure for supporting the arts. We don't have a composers union as such. I mean, the BBC is commissioning a certain amount. And there is perhaps naive, but there is a certain amount of admiration for the structures which put music and animation at the heart of national life. And that side of the story is easy to forget. So people like Britain, people like Tippett, whether they were on the left or they weren't on the left, were nonetheless looking towards state-sponsored structures for creating. And it's very often around film music, and because the broadcasters are one of the main producers of cultural production in the post-war period.
Thank you for this. This is really fascinating. I have a question that's related to Harry's, and that's when you began playing the music, I immediately thought this sounds like Mio or Stravinsky, and I'm curious. As you were going through his biography, there is this very sudden change when he's 20 years old, and I'm wondering if there's the possibility that the jazz influence is perhaps not coming directly from jazz, but maybe filtered through interwar French music that he knew, that would sort of have been a last contact with the West.
Yes, of course. But I was mainly referring to the fact that jazz was, as I told you, forbidden genre, and we weren't playing jazz. The composers weren't composing jazz, but we are sure that they had access to some recordings, or but for sure he began knowing and listening to jazz before this time. But it is interesting to see this, because of Dumitru Capoianu we don't have very many informations regarding to his biography. We don't have a monographic book of his, and I took a lot of information regarding his biography from autobiographical document brought to us by his wife when she gave us the Dumitru Capoianu fund for our Romanian musical archive. So yes, this is how I saw where he was involved and in which institutions he was related to, and I'm sure that he also continued in this period of forbidden music, jazz music in Romania.
Well, I'd like to add something that I learned from reading some books about jazz in those periods. I know that actually there was a kind of contrabanda with LPs and all kind of recordings that were brought here by pilots from the national, TAROM agency, or a Navy officer coming from, and professors from the university, from the conservatory in those times, invited actually their disciples, and were listening to this new, including the jazz music LPs. On the other hand, there are fine, great libraries of British embassies, United States and French embassies in Bucharest. They provided a huge amount of musical of all kinds, and that was a great opportunity for them to listen. And I remember another thing that Alex Vasiliou said, that in the 60s started somehow coming here important bands, jazz bands from including United States, and great performers. And so that was another kind of having contact with such musics. I think, yeah, might be an explanation.
If possible, I would like to share that in Soviet music studies there is a concept of magnetizdat as parallel to samizdat, because about this illegal, dissemination of LPs, and not only but
Not only
different
jazz.
music.
Uh-huh.
I wonder if Soviet animation had any influence, because I seen some similarities, and by the way, jazz was not forbidden; it was officially established in Soviet Union. We already had Philharmonic jazz ensembles in late 50s.
I am not sure, but I think yes, most
think so,
likely.
yeah.
But yeah, it's very interesting that here it was banned, and in the USSR not.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Desiela. Now I'm passing the floor to Costin, inviting our next speaker. Costin?
Our next speaker is Lavinia Gheorghe. She's our traitor because she doesn't work at here in the university. She's a researcher, ethnomusicologist at the Institute of Ethnography and Folklore. I think she's the first of them who gave a paper at an international symposium 5 years ago or so. It was about protest music at some meetings against the government, and she studied the music played at that protest. She just finished a PhD thesis about some unknown works of an Romanian ethnomusicologist. And today she will give us a paper about Romanian and Gypsy oral music in a communist film, The Prodigal Father, by Adrian Petrigenaru. Please, Lavinia, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. So I have many interest in the ethnomusicological domain. Like Professor Moisil said, my paper is not part of my PhD thesis, but and I tried my best with it. I tried to find some oral music in communist movies. Of course, folklore was used in lots of composition for film music, But I found very interesting that in this particular movie, traditional gypsy music appears. So, yeah, about the context of the Romanian films during the communist period, there has been a lot of discussion in the previous days, so I will not insist on the subject anymore. But this film must be seen and understood, and its music must be seen and understood as part of the context. In 1974, the first feature film of director Adrian Petringenaru was released. The Prodigal Father, Tatăl Risipitor, screened a story from a village in Oltenia region, in south of Romania, at the end of the Second World War, with Y.S. family in the foreground. The screenplay was adapted by Eugen Barbu, a writer well regarded by Romania's communist regime, from one of his short stories, Oaie și ai săi, Oaie and his family, published in 1958. The film is set in 1945, when the new agrarian reform, which required the expropriation of governors and the allotment of peasants, led to revolts among the peasants who wanted the wealthy class quickly removed from power. Oaie, played by Toma Caragiu, is the story's central character, a reluctant and fearful old man with a rather diffuse role who travels a difficult road to understand and accept the reforms. Grief-stricken at the loss of two of his sons in the war, he wants to protect his remaining children and balks when the youngest son, Zamfir, played by Florin Zamfirescu, enters politics on the side of the communists, preparing the rebellion against the governors. At the opposite pole, Zamfir is an ambitious young man, confident in his future with the communists. He always rebels against his parents, even when he chooses his future wife, Sabina, played by Carmen Maria Strujac, a ravishing, beautiful orphan gypsy, who also gets Marin's attention, Zamfir's older brother, played by Gheorghe Dinică, a man just returned from war as an invalid. But this ambition will bring Zamfir's death one night when, with his other brother, Lisandru, played by Răducu Itcus, he enters the estate of the Necșești boiars to retrieve some books that reveal the illegalities committed by the rich class. Katinka Necșești, played by Marga Barbu, the wife of screenwriter Eugen Barbu, a fierce and domineering woman, kills the two brothers by electrocution. The boys' sacrifice gives the villagers even more impetus to revolt, and they succeed in driving the landowners away. The end of the film shows Oaie, the father, grieving the loss of his children, staring helplessly into the distance. Adrian Petringenaru's film debut was highly praised in the press at the time. Here are some quotes. This film, based on an admirable novel by Eugen Barbu, deserves to be called The Making of the World, because indeed we see here the genesis of the truth, the making, birthed in pains, and especially in those bitter pains that are sufferings and ironies of injustice, wrote a film critic, Dumitru Ion Sucheanu. And another one, quote, I saw a film by Adrian Petringenaru drawn in the manner of icons on glass, with the conquering naivety of an art that retrains the essence, but also has the joy of decorativeness, in which proportion and perspective are used with unexpected functions and values, noted film critic Florica Ichim. There were, however, some harsh remarks about the film, even from regular people. In a Courier column of the Cinema newspaper, where readers sent in their opinion on the recent films released, Alex Markovic wrote, I quote, Director Adrian Petringenaru has made a film in which every frame, every sequence is composed with too much care for form. As a demonstration, the film is beautiful, but as a communicative force, it loses many of the script's initial values, its realistic virtues. The film thus acquires an undesirable note of monotony and gives a general impression of artificiality. End of quote. Constantin Onică, another regular viewer, had a similar opinion. I quote, "I saw the film The Prodigal Father, and contrary to my expectations, after watching it, I asked myself, and I still do, why was this film made? What is its message? Who and why does it want to convince? A serious subject, such as one it purposed to deal with, manages to convince nothing and nobody, since none of the forces involved in the conflict are sufficiently vigorously outlined and represented." End of quote. The film music, composed by Paul Urmuzescu, was created in a folkloric spirit, starting from an Oltenian theme. As the title of the score suggests, Oaie și ai săi, temă oltenească, Oaie and his family, Oltenian theme. Paul Urmuzescu was born in 1928, and he is mostly known for his light music compositions, but he also wrote symphonic music or film music. In The Prodigal Father, the idyllic atmosphere of the Romanian traditional village on the threshold of significant social change is underlined by the somber sounds that mark the battle scenes of the democratic forces, and also by the folkloric themes, intended as if to recreate that ethos of the Romanian peasant constantly tested by the hardship of the times. For example, the scenes of Oaie's modest household are accompanied in the background by that very Oltenian theme. And here is a short example.
Constanți Ifan, auzi?
Ce mai e?
A venit Zamfir de la ședințele lui?
La cine îl mai vede?
O să vadă el pe dracu, că eu i-am zis. Mă, băiete, mă, tu de ce te bagi în politică? El nu, că s-au schimbat vremurile, că o să vedem noi cei de capul lui.
O știe el ce o știe.
Mă, muiere, tu-i ții parte și nu-i bine. O să dăm de dracu cu toți.
So the parents are concerned about Zamfir affiliation with the politic. The rubato themes are also present in the musical discourse as a reminiscent of the melancholic character of Romanian Doina. The discussion of the Doina had been long debated in the last decades of 19th century and the first decades of the 20th century, when the intellectual class and even some composers considered it to embody the purest essence of the Romanian people's spirituality. And there is such an example in the musical theme that accompanies love scenes between Zamfir and his beloved Sabina, which is called in the score the love theme. But unfortunately, I don't have an example of it. The appeal to folkloric sources is evident not only in the themes that accompany the dramatic scenes of the film, but also in the folk instruments that are used. Here are a few examples. The leaf song, which appears in the generic, or the interventions in the scenes of the peasant revolt from the market, or in the scenes of madness of the Necșești boiar, or the themes attributed to the pan flute or the cymbal, like Mother Constanța's theme, who is moved by the return of her son Marin from war, or the ending theme when the peasants reclaim their land and Oaie becomes aware of their victory in the fight against the landowners. And just a short example of this leaf song. Moreover, the film score also suggests an appeal to a traditional genre of funeral ritual, the lamentation, bocet. However, when I correlated the order of the setting noted in the score with those in the film, I discovered that the funeral melody is not present in the film's editing, so maybe it was removed or not used at all. The movement in which it should have appeared before this scene with Marin's return from war corresponds to the setting depicting a gypsy camp on the edge of the village, a scene accompanied not by funeral music, but by gypsy lăutar music. The gypsy scene is really interesting, especially as it appears as a splash of color in the gray monotony of the film's images. The gypsies, dressed in their colorful clothes, with hats, skirts, and shiny salves, slaughter lambs and prepare them at a campfire to celebrate Easter. It is also the time when weddings take place in their community, so the scene evokes the covenant between Zamfir and Sabina. In Eugen Barbu's novel, only a short passage refers to the musical element, without much clarification of the songs and melodies that gypsies sang. I quote, "The gypsies sang hoarsely, tearing the flesh. There followed a dance, and the gypsy women took out their dairas, an instrument similar to a tambourine, beating them widely with their hands." End of quote. Therefore, no mention about any professional musicians or a taraf. A taraf is a small folk ensemble. Yes. However, the film's setting does feature gypsy Lăutar music performed by Lăutar themselves. About the emergence of Lăutar music, the dates are uncertain. It may have its origins in the early 20th century in the cities of the south and east of the country, but the attention of folklorists at that time was directed, imposed, or even deliberate, only towards Romanian traditional music. Lăutar music was played by lăutari at their own parties, so it was aimed to a specific group, the Roma Lăutari, with an ethnic component and also a professional one. It was played by connoisseurs for connoisseurs. But it soon started to be known also by Romanian peoples. Among Lăutari players, this music was also known as gypsy Lăutar music, so underlining that ethnic component of it. Although it encompasses only two main categories, listening songs and dance music, Lăutar, Hora, and Sârba, its complexity is evident in the densely ornamented melodies, in the fine tonal harmonizations, and in the many micro-intervals interspreaded in the melodic discourse. The choice of this kind of music in a communist film is curious not only because of the period in which the film was released, the years of Ceausescu nationalism, when recordings of Lăutar music were allowed by government permission only on national television broadcast on New Year's Eve, but also because of the time in which the film takes place. It seems quite unlikely that such complex music would have been played in a 1945 gypsy camp. It's true that in those 70s, when the film was released, Lăutar music was in its heyday, if we may say that. The state governing bodies allowed a few LPs of Lăutar music to be printed by Electrecord, the only record label at that time, partly because they ensured its economic survival, because Lăutar music sold better than the hundreds of records of supposedly authentic Romanian folklore. But in the case of this film, it is possible, however, that the choice of this music was simply random, as it was thought to best represent the ethnic category of gypsy in that specific scene. I found the Lăutar song and Hora that appear in this film on two records released by Electrecord of the famous Lăutari Dona Dumitru Siminică and Florea Cioacă. In the Lăutar song that opens this scene, sung in Romani language, the soloist is accompanied only by the cymbal, although two more violinists play in the film's extras, indicating the subsequent synchronization of sound with image. The Lăutar sings, "Hai la muncate cinstime, let's go to honest work." The title of this song appears quite suggestive, almost as an exhortation to the gypsies, whose reputation was not exactly clean at the time. So let's hear it.
Sabina Uela chiamami scesa a streino? Besta.
Hai!
The song can be found in a slightly different version with a taraf accompaniment on Dona Dumitru Siminica's disc, Gypsy Popular Music, muzică populară țigănească, released first in 1963 and reissued in 2009 in the series of CDs Treasures of Lăutar Music, comori ale muzicii lăutărești, also by Electrecord. The singer's performance style is strikingly similar in the two versions, but no source indicates exactly whether Dona Dumitru Siminica is the one who performed the song in the film. And this is the recorded version. As for the Lăutar Hora, it appears on the record with Florea Cioacă, a famous violinist Lăutar in the last century, released by Electrecord in 1965. The version used in the film is the one from the disc this time. It is more clear. Although, again, the instruments heard on the recording, violin, cymbal, and contrabass, don't match the ones in the film. The melody was only slightly shortened to fit the timing of the scene. And this is the film song.
Să știi că pe Sabina o iau cu mine.
La noi asta e noaptea anunții. Ai bun.
Dar o iau de tot, să știi.
N-ai luat-o de la nimeni, n-ai de plătit nimic. Recorded version from the CD released in 2007. It is very interesting how for a few minutes this music takes center stage in that scene. It is no longer used to simply accompany the dialogue of the characters or the various shots in the film, as is usually the case with music throughout this film, but is brought right to the fore. At a time when gypsy music was not officially recognized, except for the situation I mentioned above, its appearance in a communist film is, I dare to say, brave at least.
Perhaps the screenwriter, Eugen Barbu, had some involvement in its choice, as his position would have facilitated certain concessions from the official censorship. There are no comments on the film's music in the press of the time, and the gypsy scene is not even mentioned in the critical commentary. It would have been impossible anyway that any reference to it could get past the communist censorship. Thank you.
Thank you, Lavinia, for your nice and vivid and colorful presentation. I said in the beginning that today's session would give some answers to our questions put in the in the previous days. So this is the answer for what is slum music. It's a synonym for the slum music. This is gypsy kind of. Yeah, on which Joanna talked yesterday, yeah.
So gypsy music,
Mhm.
slum music, I would say.
Yeah.
But that's Lautar music which has come to the city, or
It's a kind of urban.
Yeah, it's an urban music.
An urbanized version.
But not only gypsy music is slam music.
There are also synonyms, yeah.
There has to be another
And-
word in English. I'm sorry. It's an offensive term in English. It really is.
Also in Romanian, mahala means it's the outskirt of.
Periphery.
Outskirts is different to
Okay.
but this is on the edge of the village, isn't it? This scene? Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that was her point, that a music which is urban, it's used in a context which is not normal for a nomad
Gypsy camp.
gypsy camp, yeah. And only because it's the cliche that gypsies are gypsies, and what should be put for a gypsy camp? A gypsy music. But there are different kind of gypsies.
And different kind of gypsy music.
May I ask more about the official or state policies regarding the gypsy music? And it was some changes during the communist regime. Because comparing in Russia, it were, quite official gypsy theaters and everything. It was even academized, I think.
Well, I don't think it's the case here in Romania. But like I said, there were some little concessions of the government for those LPs with Lăutar gypsy music. But I think at that time you weren't allowed to define this music as gypsy Lăutar music, only by Lăutar music. I mean, the gypsies couldn't have had their own music. It would be something because they weren't recognized or as a minority, and they weren't supposed to have any kind of their own music here. Only Romanian traditional music was accepted and popularized.
Yeah, may I add something?
We should refer to them as Roma, which is the accepted term. But do you know about the movie Shatra? And
I have heard of it, of course, but I don't think I have seen it. But
the movie, you're right, but was in those times Moldavia was under the Soviet Union, so was part of the Soviet Union, but somehow it was encouraged to be. Now, just a small comment. I remember that anyway, this kind of how to call gypsy music or oral musics related to past periods, 19th century or something with Lăutar music. I know from late Speranța Rădulescu, she said that was somehow encouraged in 60s and the beginning of the 70s, this kind of music, because actually the Lotars, which were part of the nomad population or something like this, they were attracted to the new established social institutions or cultural artistic institutions. They became part of these institutions, different, including in the army and also in the Ministry of Poliția, Internal Affairs. They build new ensembles, popular ensembles, and they get day by day prestige, so on and so forth. And also the only one cum se numește Electrecordul?
Label.
Label in Romania, Electrecord in those times. They supported them publishing LPs, so on and so forth, with including this Donna Siminica, because they before 50s were Lotars in the peripheries of Bucharest or somewhere in the restaurants here in the central ones. And after that they were invited to be part of these ensembles, getting salaries, doing concerts in Bucharest and abroad, and anyway getting prestige. So, and also that this was a kind of couloir of populating their musics from late 19th century and beginning of the 20th.
I may add some things. Lavinia told the general frame, but I want to stress that professional musicians in the villages and also in the urban areas were Roma from the late 19th century. So Romanian music was taken by them and played for them as a professional. And in the 1950s, when communism came here, they made the huge ensembles following the Moiseev ensemble. So you have the National Orchestra of Folklore, the state-controlled folklore. And most of them were Roma because Roma were the players. Yeah. So even if they are not labeled as Roma, you see them and they play national folklore, let's say. But beside that, they have the music they play for themselves that was as professional, which was music that was not emerged from the other kind of Roma people. You know, there are a lot of people of, how to call them, different ethnies, with, yeah, of Roma. So this music comes from the musicians and little by little spread out, not all over the country, but in the south, in the Wallachia and Moldavia part. For example, in Transylvania, it has no relevance. Even if you are Roma, you don't pay attention to this. And on that single that Lavinia showed on the left, it was something new for me. It was written Muzică țigănească. And yeah, when you say țigănesc or gypsy, it's not the intention to offend, but to say the word that it was said in that epoch, and which with Roma people identify themselves. You will see the expression muzică lăutărească, muzică țigănească, muzică lăutărească țigănească, but not muzică Roma.
The 1990s was used this term actually to refer. Okay.
It was the same situation, the change in to Roma.
Yeah.
After 99.
Right.
Yes.
And also, I'm not sure if I'm 100% correct, but the music from Shatra, it was a film made by Emil Loteanu in Moldavia. It was an artificial music. linking to the cliche that gypsies have freedom, colorful, they break rules in order, they don't conform to, I don't know, nowadays we will say that they are against capitalism, globalization. They are the freedom which everyone is eager to. And their music was composed in order to support this view. I think he has no relation to real Roma music.
No, I think we're probably speaking about the same film. I was about to ask about the Soviet film Lautari, which probably is this. I don't recognize the Romanian name, but
Shatra is the camp.
Oh, okay. That's a different. But it must be the same from 1972, and it won several prizes on film festivals. So I was just thinking that it was a Soviet film, and really popular, especially in Italy, and perhaps it had some effect on the courage to bring the Lautari music to a communist film. So I don't know, but it must be the same film from 1970.
I just checked the internet. It was produced in well, at least released in 76.
Oh. Okay, so this Lautari.
Should I check the? Posso verifica?
Lautari is 1972 Soviet romantic drama.
Could be a trend.
Directed by Emil Lautari.
Lautari in 72, yeah.
Maybe he, tapped into a gold mine there and did several. Maybe it was a sequel. The Camp.
Yeah.
Is this the film you mentioned? Oh no! Sorry, just puzzle paper.
But Costin is right. It was big myth about these free people that functioned as Roma people, as some symbol of
If that's from 1976, so that's 4 years later. Then so that there must that's a different one then. Yeah. So that they found a good musical format.
Right. Thank you, Lavinia. Congratulations once again. Of course, let's have a break. The coffee, yes, 10 minutes, no problem. Yeah, you're right. You are very precise. Yeah, but we need coffee. Yes, of course. Ja, eine kleine Pause. Thank you.
Dai, o pauză de 5 minute. Nu, n-am cu internet deocamdată. Așa și asta. Da, stai să vedem dacă se... Dacă am văzut că nu merg în PowerPoint și o să le pun din... Dacă nu merg, da. pregătesc.
Dar nu știu dacă ai pus-o pe net.
A zis că pune când...
O pui tu acum? Ha. Dear colleagues, I'm inviting you for our last speaker. Austin, you're right. Well, pleasure, dear Vlad, having you here. As you know, Vlad graduated our university, PhD, not PhD yet,
First year.
Yeah, first year in PhD under the Valentina supervision. He did a lot in this research of musicological aspects. Had a lot of collaboration with the radio broadcasting in Bucharest, and now he's member of our musical editing house of the university. Won numerous prizes in musicology competitions in Bucharest and abroad, and he's doing a very nice research, his PhD, about the musicological publications in the Romanian cultural landscape during the communist regime, which is extremely offered and topic because when we translated the musicological publications from abroad, always they were cut it somehow or changed the meaning of many things. So I'm inviting Vlad to present his paper, The Music of Romanian Story Set in the Wild West, Adrian Enescu and the Transylvanian Film Trilogy. Vlad?
Thank you very much for your introduction. Yes, I must also say that I think this is my first venture into the film music universe, and it was a real pleasure to be part of this project team together with my colleagues, to go to the Jilava archive, and to discover truly hidden treasures of Romanian film music.
Sorry, just we are laughing always when we are listening to this name of the city, Jilava, because Jilava during the communist regime was the prison. So.
Yeah, when we say Jilava, we always think about the prison. Okay, but yeah, and at the beginning, I was wondering, being for the first time in this area of film music, what am I going to write about? And I took the list. We had a list of films and music available, and I found this Adrian Enescu film trilogy, and I searched it, and I was surprised to learn about this Western theme. But we will get to that immediately. Shortly after the appearance of the first films made by Auguste and Louis Lumière, an important genre for cinema began to emerge in the early years of the 20th century. Set in the Wild West, the territory west of the Mississippi River, Westerns depict a world of adventure, cowboy exploits, gold rushes, and conflict with Native Americans. The main roles are often played by skilled gunslingers, engaged in a battle between lawmen and outlaws. The Great Train Robbery, directed in 1903 by Edwin S. Porter, inaugurated the long line of westerns, whether low-budget films or films featuring the big stars of the day. The technological advances of the 1930s and 1940s, notably the switch from silent to sound film and the introduction of color film, allowed directors such as Fritz Lang, Howard Hawks, and Michael Curtiz to place greater emphasis on artistic expression and historical realism. Directors of the 1950s and 1960s continued along this path, exploring the complexity and humanity of characters while trying to break out of stereotypes, such as idealizing positive characters and demonizing negative ones. At the same time, Native Americans, previously portrayed as villains, began to be placed in a better light. Towards the end of the 7th decade of the 20th century, Westerns set in the Wild West lost their popularity in the United States, where they were hardly produced at all by the late 1980s, but all their elements, except the setting, were found in films set in outer space. Thanks to a strong promotion and distribution strategy, the Western genre has gathered a large audience around the world and influenced filmmakers in many countries. After the end of the Second World War, Europe saw an increase in the number of Western productions, culminating in the birth of the spaghetti Western subgenre after 1960. This term refers to films made by co-productions involving teams from Italy, Spain, and the United States, the best-known director in this area being Sergio Leone. Leone's famous trilogy, comprising A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, explores the typology of the anti-hero, portrayed by Clint Eastwood, a role that brought the American actor worldwide movie star status. The success of Leone's films was also largely due to the music of Ennio Morricone, known today as one of the most iconic composers of music for the big screen. Also from Italy, but with a strong emphasis on humor, the Terence Hill-Bud Spencer duo became known in the spaghetti Western world thanks to films such as God Forgives, I Don't, They Call Me Trinity, and Trinity, It's Still My Name. The popularity of Westerns has spread beyond the Iron Curtain. After 1950, the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, the German Democratic Republic, and Czechoslovakia began to produce films whose themes borrowed elements from Westerns and were labeled Ostern, from the German word Ost, meaning East. Films such as Miles of Fire, produced in the USSR in 1957, Lemonade Joe, or The Horse Opera, made in Czechoslovakia in 1964, The Sons of the Great Bear, made in German Democratic Republic in 1966, and White Son of the Desert, set in USSR in 1970, fall into this category. Romania was also under the influence of the Soviet Union, and towards the end of the 1970s and beginning of the 1980s, a Romanian perspective on the Western genre appeared, brought together in the trilogy of films The Transylvanians, Ardeleni. In my research, I will focus on the relationship between the films, directed by Dan Pizza and Mircea Veroiu, and the music signed by Adrian Enescu, one of the most prominent film music composers of that time in Romania. Film, stage, pop, and academic music were essential coordinates in the works of Enescu. He graduated from the Bucharest Conservatory in the class of Aurel Stroie, one of the leading representatives of the Romanian post-war avant-garde, and quickly established himself in the Romanian cultural landscape, thanks to his position among the pioneers of electronic music, as well as his intense activity in the area of theater and film. In the latter field, Enescu illustrated a remarkable prolificacy, signing the score for over 60 films. He felt an affinity with cinema as a teenager, as he confessed in an interview. I quote, "When I was skipping school, I used to go to the movies." End of quote. Dan Pizza and Mircea Veroiu, the directors of the films in the Transylvanians trilogy, were important figures in Enescu's career, and he openly expressed his admiration for them. I quote, "My career as a film music composer is primarily linked to the films of these two directors." End of quote. In addition to film music, Adrian Enescu has also become known to the general public in Romania thanks to some pop songs, the most famous being Bună seara, iubite, Good Evening, Beloved, performed by Loredana Groza. The Prophet, The Gold, and the Transylvanians from 1978 is the first Romanian Western production, in which the story imagined by screenwriter Titus Popovici combines action and humor. The film critic Ioan Lazar considered that the film, directed by Dan Pizza, constitutes, I quote, a strange symbiosis between the archetypal lyricism of fairy tales and parody, between the epic manner, based on the skeleton of popular narratives, and the permanent ironic assault on the classic procedures of the genre. End of quote. Eager to escape poverty, three brothers from the village of Poplaca, Ion, Traian, and Romulus Romibrad, cross the Atlantic Ocean and arrive in the state of Utah in early 1880s, where they come into conflict with the Prophet, the leader of a Mormon colony. A notable component of the film concerns the attribution of lines in English language to the American characters, while the non-English speaking brothers, Traian and Romi, interact with the locals in Romanian, which creates many amusing situations. The strategy of using English for the American characters will also be seen in the next two parts of the Transylvanian trilogy. The film contains nationalist elements through the evocation of events during the Romanian War of Independence in 1877-1878, as well as a scene in which the brothers fly a Romanian flag in front of the house where they settle for a while. The action is enhanced by Adrian Enescu's ingenious music, inspired by the sounds of the American Western, characterized by harmonic progressions and simple modal scales, including the use of pop and jazz chord notation in the score. The orchestration features instruments often found in Western soundtracks, such as harmonica, violin, or guitar, but there are also moments involving a small brass band or even a choir, the latter being used in the sequences depicting the Mormon prophet in the midst of the religious community. The violin is sometimes accompanied by the acoustic guitar playing a melody built on the minor pentatonic scale found in blues. But moments of intrigue, such as the brothers' preparation for an ambush or the final battle with the prophet's men, are surprising in their use of synthesizer-played Western sounds that are highly unusual for the genre. Unfortunately, the PowerPoint doesn't work, but I have them saved. And this is the introduction credit scene. Yeah, this is actually a 12-bar blues pattern. And I have the blues theme.
Scoundrel! You shouldn't have done that, sir. It was entirely useless. After you, sir.
Okay. And the final battle.
We have brought you the gold Waltrop wanted to steal from you. It's your turn to defend it. All right. All right, men. Get ready. You bloody blackguards! Surround them!
I truly had lots of fun watching these movies. The second part of the series, The Actress, the Dollars, and the Transylvanians, from 1980, continues the story of the three brothers from Transylvania, this time directed by Mircea Veroiu. The Transylvanians now come into conflict with a group of bandit actors, disguised as Native Americans, who rob trains carrying large sums of money. Romy continues his journey to reaching maturity, Ion keeps his image as a notorious gunman, and Traian falls in love with the main artist of the acting troupe, Annabelle Lee, who is in fact the mistress of Mac Wheeler, the leader of the bandits. As for the film's music, Adrian Enescu reprises certain moments from the first film, such as the theme of June, Romy's fiancée, at the beginning of the film, or the Western theme that accompanies an early duel between Ion and the bandit Ambrose Green. Like that of the previous film, the music in The Actress, the Dollars, and the Transylvanians reaffirms Enescu's predilection for electronic synthesizer-produced sound. Accentuating the drama of the action, the synthesizer moments are always strikingly rhythmic, often in a polyphonic context, with 4 voices and up to 6 voices harmonically supported by another synthesizer. Adrian Enescu's talent for pop music can also be seen in 2 songs involving voice and piano. One of these, Lorena, plays the part of the artist's theme, who sings this song in scenes at the beginning and towards the end of the film. And for this film, I've chosen this sequence of polyphonic music involving synthesizers. The Baby, the Oil, and the Transylvanians from 1981 concludes the Transylvanians trilogy and returns Dan Pizza to the director's chair. Although the 3 brothers initially intend to travel back to Transylvania, their journey is delayed as Romy's fiancée June becomes pregnant and Romy decides to buy a house and land for the safe birth of the child. Ion helps his brother by becoming a deputy sheriff and comes into conflict with McCallum, who drives the landowners out of the area with the help of a band of outlaws. Traian discovers the source of the intrigue while digging a well. It's about oil. After the protagonists run in with a gang of gunmen, the antagonist ends up being shot by a Greek priest from Brăila, played with savory humor by Jean Constantin. The final part of the trilogy brings back the nationalist theme through the interaction between Traian and Peter Orban, his Hungarian neighbor also from Transylvania. The two get along well at first, but then at Romy's wedding they clash over their worship of the protagonists of the 1848 revolution in Transylvania, the Romanian Avram Iancu, respectively the Hungarian Lajos Kossuth. The threat of McCallum's gang leads the two neighbors to come together and fight against the danger that threatens them both. The theme of nationalism, heavily promoted in communism, was combined here with the usual Western theme, and appreciation for this insertion continued to be present in post-2000 film critics' analysis, but in a somewhat more tempered tone. In terms of music, the final film in the trilogy features more complex writing and the diversification of the instrumental ensemble. For example, the credits build a characteristically Western tone model moment, featuring an unexpected modulation from A minor to E flat minor and back to A minor, bringing together synthesizers, voice, 12-string guitar, drum set, trumpet, and string orchestra. The blues theme, attributed to the guitar which accompanies the villains, is the only material that runs through all 3 films. A lyrical theme, used in many sequences of the film, starts from the thematic head of the chorus of the Romanian folk song Mocirița cu trifoi, which Adrian Enescu continues in the manner of Western music. Even if they are not noted in the score and have a rather declamatory aspect, folkloric diegetic sounds can also be found in the scenes where Traian and Peter Orban drink together and sing songs from each other's folklore. The final battle between the brothers allied with the Orban family and the gunman Hardban McCallum also marks the climax of the score. This time too, acoustic instruments appear alongside 4 synthesizers, which carry out a predominantly polyphonic discourse, with a dramatic theme attributed to the violins, and the trumpet stands out in passages where repeated notes are found in 16-note rhythm, which fits perfectly with the cavalry's assault of the gunmen. The film's final sequences show the birth of Romi Brad's son, and the music played by the string orchestra takes on the character of a lullaby thanks to its ternary matter and melodic lyricism. And again, movie time. The intro.
You see, I had gone, he's as quick as can be, I had gone, beware, I had gone, if you die, who's to care, you make your vow to show them how, now then keep your track, and then I look back when your job is done. You'll see, I'm gone. He's as quick as can be.
Nu vă mai mocăiți atâta de parcă ați fi niște domnișoare. Haideți, că a început circusul! McCallum a pornit să-l prăpădească pe Orban. Hai! Come on, get this fight. Come on, let's go! Come on, get ready for the fight! Hey! Hey! We won't let McCallum take away our properties. Hey you! Why so skills?
Ai venit, sogore. Mă rog, mă, Peter. La cum era să te las, bă? Haine, trăiești tu aici. Romi, tu acolo. Șogore, mai încoace.
Yeah, Shogor is in Hungarian, means brother-in-law. Okay, and I mentioned that folk tune, Mociriță with cu trifoi. First, I'm gonna play the original, let's say, and.
Mociriță cu trifoi, măi, mociriță cu trifoi, m-o pețit la Maica doi, măi, m-o pețit la Maica doi.
Okay, and now
Mulțumesc, fata mea. Strigă, bă, fecior, bă, strigă. Să se audă până la Poplaca.
Dor de țară, revedea-o iară, până-n primăvară. Dor de țară, pâinea mea amară, dulce o să-mi pară, dorul o să piară. Cât-i lumea am tot colindat, vine vremea să mă întorc la mine în sat. Am gustat de toate, am și dat de greu, vreau și eu la mine acasă, în satul meu, al meu, al meu, al meu, satul meu. Dor de țară, revedea-o iară, până-n primăvară. Dor de țară.
To summarize the lyrics, it's about the longing for the homeland and returning to the natal village. Yes, return to Poplaca. Even though the approach of the two directors, who are known for their art film productions, has been criticized, the three films in the Transylvanian series were a real hit with audiences. In addition to the interesting story and outstanding acting, all three films feature high-quality music. Composer Adrian Enescu demonstrated in a fine cinematic sense, coupled with a remarkable musical talent, which allowed him to create dramatic and lyrical scores without falling into the cliches of the music for the Western film genre. Enescu's collaboration with Pizza and Veroiu continued throughout the 1980s, and his involvement with the director and actor Sergio Nicolaescu's projects resulted in his scores for the historical films such as Us from the Front Lines and Mircea. In an interview conducted near the end of his life, Adrian Enescu reaffirmed his passion for cinema and film music, but especially his desire to create characters through music. And I quote, "Film music educated me. It sent me to explore the most obscure areas of sound. In film, but also outside of film, I always wanted my music to be a character, and I used electronic, pop, chamber, symphonic language, etc. to get there. End of quote. And I thank you.
Great, thank you, Vlad. Questions, commentaries? Please, Karina.
Yes, thank you. What a great topic. and I don't doubt that you had lots of fun with the films. The folklore tunes reminded me of Harris' presentation and the Irish ballads as heightened emotion markers in a film. But I was thinking about the mariachi-style trumpet that was in the last film. So do you think that the Sergio Leone westerns started to have, because there seemed to be little less synthesizer and little more of the guitar trumpet collaboration in the last film? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's true that it's possible as maybe a great influence of this spaghetti western soundtrack, and Adrian Enescu, in particular in this last film, he blends very well the acoustic instruments and the synthesizer. I extracted some scenes, but in some of them they are attributed mostly to synthesizer, but not all of them. They usually go hand in hand, acoustic and synthesizer.
Here, sorry. Vlad, thank you very much. I quite agree. It's a really, really interesting paper, and it brought a couple of things to my mind with regard to something I mentioned a couple of days ago, which is how film music, I think, should change how we think about the meaning of the word composer and what a composer is doing. Especially, this is an exemplary instance, you know, where a composer has adapted his abilities to the kind of conventional demands of the genre, even though he's not slavishly obeying them. And since you mentioned the fact that Enescu uses synthesizers, I was just thinking of the fact that Maurice Jarre, who I mentioned the other day, and who wrote, you know, those big orchestral scores for Dr. Zhivago and Ryan's Daughter, when he came to set the music for Harrison Ford movie, the detective movie has become the Western of the 1980s and 1990s, I think. But in any case, when he did that a couple of years after, just 3 years after this film, you would not recognize the Maurice Jarre of the big Pasternak, you know, epic Russian stories at all. He uses shaker hymns, and because the Witness is set in an Amish community in Pennsylvania. And I'm mentioning all of this because Maurice Jarre's musical personality is completely sidelined in favor of immersing the person watching the film in the sound world that you see on the screen. And that's the impression I have here, to a different extent, but certainly there's a sense in which the composer's individuality is completely subordinated to the general collective of making the film.
Yeah, it's a certain grade of adaptability.
Yeah, I think that's a sea change in how we think about composers, frankly. It's the only genre that really does that, as far as I can see. Thanks very much.
Thank you also. Yeah.
So a leitmotif of the last few days has been varieties of humour and varieties of cross-cultural understanding and occasionally misunderstanding. And I just wonder whether you could tell us a little bit more about the audience reaction, because you said they were very popular, and you know, our contemporary, perhaps ironic reaction to some of the production, and how much there was already at the time, or you know, what the balance between seriousness and playfulness is in. It's often hard to get to the intentionality of the creative team, but I'm really interested to know what an audience in the early 1980s would have made of something which now looks to us quite low budget and quite stylized and quite ironically derivative, or was there? So could you just tell us about the varieties of humour that this trilogy maybe has in it?
Well, I believe the answer is that these films are for the large audience. They're not in the art film category. And it's also a kind of a comedy trilogy. It has some certain scenes which are more serious, let's say, but especially the Traian and Romy duo, it's very on the comedy side. I found a few numbers of the viewers. I remember in 2007 there was a survey on this, and one of the films had around 5 million attenders. Also because these films are found on YouTube, some of those channels leave the possibility to post a comment, and I was looking also for the comments. And it was funny because, as I told, these films for the American characters, they use solely English, and it's not either dubbed or subbed. It doesn't have subs. And the Romanians that were commenting there were saying, okay, we're Romanians. Where's the Romanian? I can't understand the movie. But it still appealed to the public. I was talking with my parents and they said, yes, the first film, it was delicious. The other two, so and so. But the first film especially was fun for them.
It's a really salutary reminder to think about humour and irony in these times. And I shall now incorporate bloody blackguard as a term of playful abuse. It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
How about the reviews?
I haven't searched reviews, but I was thinking, because I was fascinated with the music of Enescu, of continuing this research of his music for film, and as you noticed, maybe look in the reviews of that time.
Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. I think this, I don't know much on Enescu's work, but I think this time was a time of shift in film music production during the mid-70s till the early 80s, maybe. The change to synthesizers, to home studios, and all the sound of film music, and making this much more a professional job, and more fast and easy to produce, maybe. And another thing, if you can imagine that there's an analogy with TV music of some TV series of this period, I don't know, in Romania, or videotapes music of this period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking that you mentioned the home studio and all that. Yeah, Enescu tells in an interview that he came in contact for the first time during the 60s with the synthesizer. There was an American exposition with musical instruments, and they went a few students from the conservatory. They went there and were fascinated with this sound. And he continues by saying that was searching for means to obtain an instrument, a synthesizer, and gradually he built an home studio. So yeah, there were few composers during that time that were attracted to this sound, this electronic sound, and were trying to have these instruments at their home. Thank you.
If I may just a short addition, I had the opportunity to meet several times Adrian Janescu in his home. During my job at the Romanian Army Central Band, he invited us having some collaborations, and he had a huge laboratory there. And I remember that before 90s, he studied also in the northern countries, in Stockholm, in Oslo. I mean, he had in the 80s, the beginning of the 80s, late probably 70s, beginning of the 80s, he had the opportunity to study abroad in these cities, and for sure he get a very good contact with the composers and with the new technologies, so on and so forth. In the meantime, he bought a lot of devices in order to be here. What is very interesting that somehow his position at the level of the Romanian Composers Union pushed him somehow to do his job as best as possible. Last week I had a talk with his wife, Adina Popescu. She's an actress, and she told me that about 64 scores he composed for films.
Yeah.
Huge. And what I wanted to say that Enescu was not hired during his career. He just worked as an independent composer, and he got a lot of commissions orders from abroad, especially from Western Europe. So he wrote also a lot of music from the Westerners and getting money from there. Yeah, it's very interesting. Thank you. No more questions? No more commentaries. So, Vlad, thank you once again. Congratulations. Dear friends, just a few minutes before closing our fantastic conference here, and I'm extremely happy that we had the opportunity to have you all here and discussing great papers and listening to and sharing excellent ideas. Could you? I would like just to share with you 3 ideas. The first one is connected to the publishing of these papers, and I'm yeah. Poți să-mi și share-ești? As you probably know, and for sure some of our scholars here already know, we have this international periodical of our university called Musicology Today, and in the last year we have been published a lot of different topics, including the past conferences organized here in our university. So it would be fantastic if you accept, yeah, thank you, like a Bible. It would be fantastic if you could accept to publish your articles and your contributions at this conference in the next issues of this periodical. In this way, I would like very much to say that Florinela is the chair and in the editorial board of this periodical. So, for sure, if you accept that, she will write you an email and inviting for that. The other thing is connected to sharing ideas for the next conferences. I'm very eager. To be very honest, I was extremely. I mean, this topic, film music, is something fantastic to me, at least. It's so rich topic, and as you know, we are now scratching the field, at least in Romania. So I'm going to apply for the next year in order to get some financial support from our Ministry of Education. And for sure, if you accept that, I would be very glad to invite you to continue on different topics, but somehow related to film, music, political censorship. Anyway, I have no idea right now what might be next conference about. But anyway, we are trying to go further with this topic, and also animation film we saw here. It's fantastic, or I don't know, films for children. It's Anyway, I will let you know having our concert about the historical topic that is going to be on 12th of December with the Romanian Army Central Band. I will let you know about this concert and the echoes that are going to be. What I can say that there are also our friends from our universities, film and theater university in Romania, which are very eager also to continue the project and having collaborations. For sure, new students will be part in the next project regarding film and film musics. That's all for me. Personally, I thank you very much for being here. And if you have any ideas and sharing opinions, I'm right here. I'm inviting Karina, please.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure being and listening to the fantastic presentations, papers. Personally, I think Harry's idea about the changing nature and changing methodology of approaching composers, the nature of composing, the profession of composing, and the individual composer's status and station in society, and these changing circumstances in relation to being a composer and composing for films. I would strongly support that could some year that could be a theme. Because you have such a great material in your score collection, and it's also being completed all the time via interviews and other material, press material and stuff. So that's one idea.
That's great, yeah, for sure. And I was thinking if might be a good idea also to invite to the next conferences we organized here also the film critics from different angles, providing us ideas and insights into the subject. For instance, I think it might be very useful having, at least for Romanians, critics who knows about this field in Romania, at least. I mean, there are many things that we are not able to cover in full, of course. Yeah, thank you. Some new ideas or?
Harry, would you want? You raised your hand.
Say, in case it flies by, the opportunity flies by, and thank you very much for your endorsement of that idea. I think it strikes me as the most unexamined concept, the one that's most taken for granted in musicology, and the one that's most in urgent need of deconstruction. And in fact, I can't imagine a better context for it to happen than here, because all through this conference, it's not just a number of composers your visitors don't know very much about, apart from obviously one or two very major figures who are internationally acclaimed, but also the pressure under which Romanian composers worked. This has been a very strong theme, and of course that's particularized by the Romanian context, but it's true, I dare say, of Russian music and many other contexts. So we just have this holistic concept of so-and-so was a composer, and then this happened and this happened. But the genre changes the meaning, but also I think the social context. So yes, I think it might be. All I want to do is not to contribute anything other, if I may be so bold, than heartfelt thanks to Nikolai and to his wonderful team for this extraordinary conference. I just wanted to make sure that somebody actually said it. So please, the flow of feeling towards the top table is very warm. It's like a wedding that's going to go on forever, but I have to say, a very happy one. But could I just ask everybody to join me in applauding Nikolai and everybody else involved in this work?
For all of us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, dear Harry. I owe you a lot of thanks and also a bottle of wine. So, thank you so much, my dear friends. Hope to see you soon. Have a very nice travel back to your homes. And let's have a final coffee until some of you depart already. Yeah. Thank you so much once again. Thank you.